support of this important piece of legislation, Bill 69, an act to amend the Building Code Act of 1992 to require carbon dioxide detectors in all residential buildings. And I, too, applaud the member for Oxford for his foresight in drafting this bill. Mr. Speaker, previous legislators who sat exactly where we sit today had the wherewithal and good judgment to enact legislation that both serves to protect Ontarians from fatal threats in our homes and businesses. Those members were committed to fire alarms in all homes and carbon monoxide detection in new homes and buildings. Those members at that time saw that by enacting a simple piece of legislation, they could save lives of countless numbers of individuals and families from undue tragedy and grief that had befell far too many of them before. I was fortunate enough, Mr. Speaker, in my former employment that I worked for a very forward-thinking company that every year when they made safety presentations, one of the items that they gave those employees, myself included, were carbon monoxide detectors. And so that was some of the first carbon monoxide detectors that I had seen in our part of the country. And so I know there's a number of homes, and I'm going to take the member from Brant's suggestions and that and double check the date on mine and see how long they've been there, because that's something that probably a lot of people don't know, that there is a life cycle to those. I won't go into a lot of details. A number of speakers have talked about carbon monoxide gas that is created from burning any kind of carbon fuels. Mr. Speaker, also carbon monoxide has often been called the silent killer because it gives no clear warning to its victims. It's an invisible gas with no taste or smell. Without carbon monoxide alarms, families are unable to detect the presence of this poisonous gas in any concentration. It is an ever-present threat and has needlessly inflicted pain and suffering on many of our families and all of our communities. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to touch on several troubling statistics that I have found in research in regards to this. Number one cause of accidental poisoning, deaths in North America, close to 15% of the incidents invested by the TSA, the Technical Standards Authority, involve carbon monoxide. A British Columbia Health Organization, as one of the other members said, that each year some 13,000 Canadians experience some level of carbon monoxide poisoning. In Ontario each month, close to 150 people are seen in emergency departments for carbon monoxide poisoning, thereby causing an undue load that could be prevented in our emergency departments and causing costs to our health system that could be prevented. Somebody touched on the number of emergency department visits, almost 1,800 from 2007, 2008, 102 hospitalizations, and thereby expensive treatments for carbon monoxide poisoning. Mr. Speaker, by enacting this simple piece of legislation, Bill 69, we will be doing our part to prevent any other families from experiencing the tragedy that befell the Hawkins-Gignac family in late 2008. Richard, Laurie, Cassandra, and Jordan were all overcome by this carbon monoxide because a seemingly benign exhaust vent on a gas fireplace had become simply blocked from years of use. Like other Canadians who heat their home for comfort and survival, this family had no expectation that simply using a heating system could cause that. It's not fair or reasonable to expect that such a simple act could have such a profound consequence. The family did not own a carbon monoxide detector, and this led to their unfortunate demise. Installing a minimum of one of these carbon monoxide alarms in each home outside the primary sleeping area is a key step to protecting lives and making homes safer. It ought to go hand in hand with the need for regular inspections. I therefore urge all the members, Mr. Speaker, to support this legislation. I commend the member from Oxford again and look forward to voting on this and the possible implementation of this bill in the near future. Thank you.
Member for Oxford is 2 minutes for his response.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member from London Fanshawe, Thornhill, Beaches East York, Davenport, Kitchener-Waterloo, Brant, and Sarnia-Lambton for their kind comments and their support. Mr. Speaker, as I was listening to the presentations, it came to mind that obviously the driver of introducing this bill was because of the tragedy that happened in Woodstock to the Hawkins family. But what was interesting, and I think from the perspective of us legislators, if that house had been built a few years later, it would have had carbon monoxide detectors installed because the law said they had to. And so I think this whole bill is about awareness to make sure that all people in Ontario have the same protection when it comes to detecting carbon monoxide in their home. And so just because the house was built before 2001 doesn't mean that under the law they shouldn't have exactly the same protections as anyone else. The other thing I think that's interesting, and I've heard comments about, people say, well, you know, why should the government have to tell us we have to do this? And I want to tell that unless there's awareness there of the risk of the silent killer, when the people realize themselves that they need it, it's too late. Because it's once they recognize that that's the reason they weren't feeling well, chances are they're never going to feel any better than they felt that moment, because that very well could be the end, because they do not know what it is that what is happening to them. So I think it's so important that we bring awareness. And I think, Mr. Speaker, the main reason that I would like to see this bill pass, but the main reason I bring it back, and if for whatever reason it doesn't pass, we would continue doing the same thing. It's to create the awareness, to make sure that people realize for their own protection they should have it. Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that there are many people, if any, that wouldn't think that the price of a carbon monoxide detector would be worth it if it saves their families' lives. And I'm sure that the Hawkins family would give anything, any price, to put one in their home so that tragedy would have never happened.
Thank you. Time for this ballot item has expired. We will vote on it in about 100 minutes. Orders of the day.
Of item number 56, private member's notice of motion number 57, Mr. Balkison.
Mr. Balkison.
Mr. Speaker, I move that in the opinion of this House, the Legislative Assembly of Ontario should proclaim August 6th of each year Jamaican Independence Day throughout the province of Ontario, so that the outstanding achievements and contributions made by Ontarians of Jamaican heritage can be celebrated and recognized.
Mr. Balkinson moves private member's notice of motion number 57. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, the honourable member has 12 minutes for his presentation. Mr. Balkinson.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, it is a privilege and an honour for me to rise today and address the House. I am extremely pleased to bring forth my resolution to proclaim August the 6th of each year Jamaican Independence Day in the province of Ontario, so that the outstanding achievements and contributions made by Ontarians of Jamaican heritage can be celebrated and recognized. Before I begin, I would like to take a minute to introduce some of our guests who are here because they have an interest in this particular motion. Mr. Speaker, from the Consulate of Jamaica, we have Mr. George Ramakan. We have Carolyn Goulburn-Warren from Jamaican Information Services. Hyacinth Sulph Curlin, who many of us know, Mr. Curlin, the better half, and Ida Fogo. And Mr. Speaker, I understand there will be others that are joining us later, and hopefully I'll give it my best to recognize them as they come in. Let me start with a brief history about Jamaica. Jamaica was once ruled by the Spanish, and it was known as Santiago. In 1655, it became a British colony known as it is today, Jamaica. In the 1930s, Jamaica was heading towards another crisis due to local discontent with political changes, worldwide economic depression, falling sugar prices, unemployment, and rising population. Things finally came to a head in 1938 with widespread violence and rioting. As a result of these disturbances, the first labor unions and the two major political parties were formed in the country. So Alexander Bustamante, founder and leader of the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union, led the Jamaica Labour Party. Norman Manley, founder and leader of the National Workers Union, led the People's National Party. Both Bustamante and Manley were instrumental in Jamaica's move towards self-government. In April 1962, Alexander Bustamante became the first Prime Minister of Jamaica. On August 6, 1962, Jamaica achieved full independence from Great Britain and became a member of the British Commonwealth. A little history about Jamaicans coming to Canada. A group of 556 Jamaicans arrived in Canada in 1796. After an unsuccessful British attempt to enslave them in Jamaica. Between 1800 and 1920, a small number of Jamaicans immigrated as laborers to Nova Scotia. But from 1920 until the early 1960s, immigration was virtually non-existent. In the 1900s, the Jamaicans who migrated to Canada included John Robert Gisco, a gold prospector, James Barnwell, a carpenter, and Robert Sutherland, who graduated from Queen's University and became the first black lawyer in Canada. In the early 20th century, Jamaicans came to Canada to work as domestics, Canadian railway porters, and blacksmiths. Due to Canada's restrictive immigration policies, it wasn't until the domestic program was implemented in 1955 that there was an increase in Jamaican immigration to Canada. Up until 1965, only about 1,000 Jamaican women had come to Canada under the domestic status program. Due to severe shortage of nurses in the late 1960s, Jamaican nurses were able to come to Canada under the cases of special merit provisions of the Immigration Act. In 1967, immigration laws were modified, and under the point system, more Jamaicans were able to come to Canada based on their level of education and skill. As you can see, Jamaicans have been contributing to our country since the late 1700s. Many have made great contributions, but because of time, Mr. Speaker, I would like to take a little moment to mention a few prominent Jamaicans who most of us are familiar with. Before I begin, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Honourable Margaret Best, the Minister of Health Promotions, a Jamaican herself, who is very passionate about this resolution and will be speaking to you in a few minutes. We all remember the Honourable Lincoln Alexander. He was born in 1922 in Toronto to Jamaican parents. In 1985, he was appointed Ontario's 24th Lieutenant Governor, the first member of a visible minority to serve as a Queen's representative in Canada, which he held admirably. During his term in office, youth and education were hallmarks of his mandate. He served during the Second World War. He was the first black person to become a member of Parliament in 1968 and served in the House of Commons until 1980. He was the Federal Minister of Labour from 1979 to 1980. We also have the Honourable Alvin Curlin, former MPP Scarborough Rouge River, Speaker of this House from 2003 till 2005. As a City Councillor, I had the opportunity of serving with Mr. Curlin representing the same residents of Scarborough Rouge River. As you know, after Mr. Curlin retired from this legislature, I became his successor. He was first elected to the Ontario legislature in 1985 and has had a distinguished 20-year career representing Scarborough Rouge River. During this time, he was the Minister of Housing, the Minister of Skills Development, Deputy House Leader, and then became the Speaker of the House. Mr. Speaker, we also had the Honourable Mary Ann Chambers, former Ontario Minister of Training, Universities and Colleges, and also the Minister of Children and Youth Services, and also a former Vice President of the Scotiabank Canada. She was involved in a number of task forces concerning the role of women in the workplace. A member of the Board of Governors of the University of Toronto and Vice Chair of the Governing Council, she helped to author a university policy that no student would be prevented from studying in Toronto for inadequate financial resources. In 2003, she was awarded the Prime Minister's Medal of Appreciation for service to Jamaica by Jamaican Prime Minister Percival James Patterson in recognition of her work within Toronto's Jamaican community. On a personal note, I've known and served with the Honourable Mary Ann Chambers in this legislature. I have a great deal of respect for her and her incredible accomplishments as the Minister of Children and Youth Services. We continue to be friends today. Mr. Speaker, according to the 2006 census, there are approximately 231,000 Jamaicans in Canada, with 85% living in Ontario. Of those, 160,000 or so live in Toronto. The Consul General of Jamaica estimates there may be 300,000 Jamaicans, including those of Jamaican descent, living in our great city of Toronto. A stroll through one of our communities would provide a glimpse of the traditions and cultures that we have come to appreciate. Jerked chicken, ackee and saltfish as some of the traditional dishes Jamaicans have introduced to us. And who could resist the great reggae music that is known around the world? Bob Marley's One Love is one of my favorite songs. Let's show Jamaicans our appreciation by officially recognizing the contributions to Jamaica that Jamaicans have made to Ontario by celebrating every August the 6th, Jamaica Independence Day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and maybe I should mention some of the other people from the community in Toronto that was going to be here, and I'm not sure they're here because I can't see all the way to the back. We were supposed to have Mr. MPP Bailey, the past president of the Jamaica Canadian Association, Pauline Christian, president of the Black Business Professional Association, Sharon Folks Abrahams, president of the Jamaica Diaspora Canada Foundation, Mr. Michael Foster, CEO, Jamaica Canada Association, Sikia Thomas, an educator, Stanley Grizzle, a World War I veteran. Mr. Speaker, I also understand Gloria Richards from the Speaker's office, who've been there, as many of us know, for quite a long time,